We hope it's a good journey for you as we get to see not only the trees in the forest, but even the forest itself. How do all these trees fit together in the forest? So that's what Route 66 is all about. It's a road trip through all 66 books of the Bible. And today we are looking at the Song of Solomon. Next week, we call it a scenic overlook. We're taking a pause from our book-by-book study, and Matt Murphy will be with us and looking at the voices of wisdom, getting a handle on the whole biblical view of wisdom. So we began our road trip together many moons ago, it seems like. We came into the Promised Land, and we finally made it there with General Joshua. And then we laid the canvas out of the timeline of the history of Israel, upon which all the rest of the books of the Old Testament are painted or etched on that canvas of the historical books. And lately, we have been going through the 5 books of wisdom. Job, Psalms, Proverbs. Last week, we looked at the Ecclesiastes. And today we are looking at the Song of Solomon. Now, Solomon, as we are going to approach it today, the Song of Solomon, it's a study of context. We're going to look at the book. We're going to look at King Solomon, Adam and Eve. It's kind of interesting. You talk about Solomon, Song of Solomon. It's going to take us back to Adam and Eve, as we'll see. We'll consider the purpose of the book and interpretation and application. So to see where it fits in the structure of our Bibles, we have 5:12, 5:5:12, as Del Claytor has emphasized for us. We saw the law and then history books, and now we are at the end of the 5 books of wisdom. Now, since it comes from Solomon, or in his era, we can anchor it during the United Kingdom phase. Now, the United Kingdom is when you had Saul as the first king, and then you had David, and then you have his son Solomon. And then Solomon, as I have heard it said, Solomon ended up having a divided heart, and so the kingdom divided. And now you have 2 kingdoms. You have Israel in the north, and you have, this is all Israel up here, and then you have Judah in the south. And as after today, we start getting into the prophets, we need to keep straight. Now, where is this prophet serving? Who is he talking to? And that's the whole reason for the canvas of the timeline, to see Israel in the north, Judah in the south, and the prophets will populate that timeline. So seeing that context historically of the Song of Solomon's, there's all kinds of other questions that come to mind when we talk about this book. First of all, did Solomon write the Song of Solomon? And we'll comment a little bit about that as we go along. I'm just laying out some of the questions that we have. And if so, then how could a man with 700 wives write this book? Now, that's really the big question, isn't it? And I have some thoughts on that, and perhaps you do as well. But it's interesting that Solomon, with 700 wives, was able to write a book that celebrates the unity and the faithfulness of a one-man, one-woman commitment that's there. So, are there 2 main characters in the book, or 3? Have any of you heard of the 3-character view of the book? Have you read about that? Well, we're going to look at that really briefly. So it may not be just Solomon and the Shulamite. There may be a third party involved, and we're going to comment on that. Are they married? Well, some of the books, some of the ways that the plot is summarized kind of brings us through the engagement period, and then a wedding period, and then after the wedding period. But we're not really sure. That's an interpretive matter. And then the question why many have asked, why is it in the Bible? I mean, this is such an unusual book to have in the collection of the holy books of the Bible, the 66. But aren't you glad it's there? I mean, it brings such a different feel of our humanity and relationships and our view of God that he would include such a book as this. But it is odd that Song of Solomon is a collection of the holy books of the Bible. And then the big question is, how should it be interpreted? You know, is there 2 characters, 3 characters? What's the plot? What's really going on here? And then the final question, of course, that I have been asking is, how did I end up being the one to teach on this book? And but I am glad for it. I'm not resentful. No, I'm really glad for it because I have learned a lot from this. And hopefully, as I share as best I can, because I've been working on this for months now, as best I can, an understanding of what's going on in this book of Solomon and what's the bigger picture rather than diving down too deeply in the text that's there. But basically, when we think of the Song of Solomon, I think most of us think of King Solomon and we think of the Shulamite. Well, as a pastor, I knew when I started reading the Song of Solomon, in fact, you could check it out right in the Bibles that you have open, that when the Shulamite in verse 2 of the first chapter says, "May he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is sweeter than wine," I knew I was in trouble. And every pastor and expositor, when he bumps into verse 2, they say, uh-oh, I wonder what's coming after this. And how are we going to talk about that? But it is a book of romance. It's a book of love. It is a love poem. It's love poetry, and it's not unique in that genre in the Old Testament world, in the ancient world. There are a number of other ancient writings that are of the love poetry genre, and here we have a sacred one that it is included in our 66 books of the Bible. Now, I have appreciated kind of a view of the outline of the book from this book, The Message of the Song of Songs by Tom Gledhill. And I'm going to share with you real quick these 6 cycles. I want us, because we're not going to dive deeply into the content, I want you to get a feel for the book of the Song of Solomon. And as I mentioned, it is one of the most difficult books to chart or to follow or to outline. It's a difficult book to see what the plot is because it seems convoluted. It circles back at time. And so thus we have, in a sense, this concept of cycles. So I'm actually going to read what is listed here because I think it's going to be helpful for us to get a feel for what's in the book of the Song of Solomon. And this will give us a flyby overview. Well, the title is in verse 1. And in the Hebrew, it technically says the Song of Songs, which pertains to Solomon. Now, what is it not explicitly saying? It's not saying that Solomon is the author. I mean, he may well be. But the technical language that's used here in the Hebrew is the Song of Songs, which pertains to Solomon. So it could be a love poem that is dedicated to King Solomon. It could be a love poem that has been constructed and perhaps evolved over a period of time that is in accordance with what we know about the wisdom of Solomon. It's in character with the person of Solomon. but it may not, and it may be about Solomon and at least one of his brides, the Shulamite, but it may not be actually written by Solomon. Now, so the first cycle then is an expression of passionate longings, deep yearnings of love, black and beautiful, a hesitant inquiry and ambitious response. By the way, there are verses connected to each of these, or kind of titles of the verses as you go through each cycle. I just didn't include those because it would be a little too busy. The fragrance of love, a duet of mutual admiration and moving towards a climax. Cycle 2, springtime and showers, love in the springtime, a tantalizing tease, an affirmation and an invitation, a very troubled dream. Third cycle, the lover's royal wedding, her rustic, fragrant beauty, Solomon's sumptuous carriage, in praise of his beloved, the lover's urgent plea, a lover smitten. Fourth cycle, lost and found, another dream of frustration. Notice in here, and you're probably well aware of this, that there are some disruption things. This isn't just all glorious, oh, isn't it so romantic, but even these two figures that we read about, Solomon and the Shulamite, they have their troubles, they have their falling out, they have their misunderstandings. Another dream of frustration. The daughters of Jerusalem reply, kind of a chorus of the daughters of Jerusalem that we find popping up repeatedly through the book. In praise of her lover, an offer of help, not really lost. The fifth cycle, beauty kindles desire. Her awesome and terrifying beauty. I like that phrase. Her awesome and terrifying beauty. Dreaming in the walnut garden. Her graceful form. A duet of desire, the two of them singing this song, and it is a love poem. It's a song of desire for each other. Love in the countryside, a longing for intimacy. And the sixth cycle, the security of love, the happy couple, love's arousal, love strong as death, the little sister, a vineyard not for hire, and the continuing cycle of desire. So the Song of Solomon ends with the sense of this isn't the end of the story. This romance is going to continue, but it gives us a glimpse of this romantic love between this couple. Here's some other thoughts about the uniqueness of the Song of Solomon. Have you heard of the Holy of Holies? Have you heard of the Lord of Lords? You know, it's a Hebrew expression that takes the King of Kings, the top of the top, you know, the Holy of Holies, the holiest of the holy place itself. Well, the Song of Songs, which is literally what the title is in the Hebrew, is the song that is above all the other songs. It's a superlative that is being described even in the title. In the Latin, the book is titled The Canticles, which means the songs, and the idea is that this was a love poetry that was put to music. And perhaps at weddings, there was a time when some musical pieces would have been sung that come from the Song of Solomon. The Jewish tradition dates it in Solomon's early years of his reign when he was a young man. It's an extremely difficult book to outline, and it mentions 15 different locations from Lebanon in the north to Egypt in the south. And if you read the Book of Solomon, kind of circle or make note of some of these locations and realize, wow, this is not just in one house description of a man and a woman. It wanders all over. Now, it's interesting that the word Shulamite, and we're all, I think, aware of Solomon and the Shulamite, the king's lover, only appears once in the entire book, in chapter 6 and verse 13, the Shulamite. Oh, wait a minute, here, I quoted it for us. Come back, O Shulamite. See, she ran out of the house, she's absent, there's some disruption going on. Come back, so that we may look at you. That's the only time in the book that the Shulamite is identified. Now, here's a very interesting thing, and that is Solomon and the Shulamite come from the same Hebrew root. You know what shalom means, right? Peace. So that's Solomon's name. Shalom, peace. The Shulamite is the feminine form of peace, or it's a woman of peace, or a peaceful woman. And so what we have here, I believe, is a literary genre, a literary composition about two individuals who are literary characters that may have some resemblance to actual people like Solomon the king, because he's mentioned several times, and the Shulamite who's mentioned once. But we are talking about a literary composition where Solomon becomes the everyman and the Shulamite becomes the everywoman. So they represent humanity. It's not a love song simply about these two individuals. It is representative of the human experience that we share together. And as we enter into the love poem as it unfolds, we can identify with the experiences and the celebrations that are here. And the last thing to note is that, and I'll talk about this in a moment, that even though I believe this is not talking about Christ's love for the church, that is a very obvious and legitimate application of the book. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So, some of the context here. You know Solomon well by now, but let me remind you of several things. He's the second son of King David and Bathsheba. Who was the first son for 20 points? The one who died. That's right, the one who died, the infant who died. So Solomon is the second son. He became the king of Israel's united kingdom when he was about 16 or 18 years old. So you have a teenager running the kingdom. He was Israel's first son of a king to become a king. So these are all firsts in the history of Israel. His father chose him over the claims of even elder sons from other mothers, of course. His reign is recorded in 1 Kings 1 through 11 and 2 Chronicles 1 through 9. They're kind of parallel accounts of the reign of Solomon. And he reigned 40 years, 970 to 930, marked by peace and prosperity. It's the golden age of Solomon. In fact, if you trace the boundaries of the Holy Land, this is my understanding from past study, but you trace the boundaries of the Holy Land as to what God promised would be the promised land, and what was occupied and ruled over by the Jews. The greatest extent of the kingdom is under Solomon. It's never been greater than during the time of Solomon. And even during Solomon, there was territory of the promised land that is yet to be fully inherited, and probably will not be until the King of Kings comes. So, as you know, Solomon was world renowned for his wisdom and his wealth. The Queen of Sheba traveled some 1,200 miles to verify the rumors of his wisdom and wealth. First Kings chapter 10 makes note of this. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the house that he had built, this palace, and the food of his table, the seating of his servant, this pageantry, the service of his waiters and their attire, his cupbearers, and his burnt offerings which he offered at the house of the Lord, she was breathless. She was just knocked over. And this is a queen used to royalty, but she was blown away by the pageantry and the wealth of Solomon. And then she said to the king, "It was a true story that I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom, but I did not believe the stories until I came and my own eyes saw it. And behold, the half of it was not reported to me. You have exceeded in wisdom and prosperity the report which I heard." And he was very rich. I had another slide that I took out because I thought, well, I have too many slides here. But on that slide, I was doing some research on how wealthy was Solomon anyway. Well, he had kind of an annual income from all of his sources as a king of about, they estimate, about $1.5 billion a year income is what he had. So he was a pretty wealthy guy. As we know, he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, most of them foreign. And by the way, if you look in ancient history and you study the Chinese history, you see that their emperors had the same thing. You know, the Chinese emperors had a huge harem. The Saudi Arabian rulers had their harems. It was common in the ancient day to express your power and your wealth in terms of the harems that you had at your disposal. And so what Solomon was doing was kind of replicating the culture that was around him. But here was the problem. As Solomon grew old, 1 Kings 11, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God. That's the problem. And that's somewhat why we believe that the Song of Solomon probably came in the early years of Solomon's life before his heart had been turned and had become divided. Now this leads us, so Solomon started well and he finished poorly. And when Solomon died, the kingdom was split in two. Now, we're going to summarize a few key takeaways as we go along here. And the first one is that we can all perhaps take to heart is that growing older may increase our vulnerability to foolish choices. You think that's true? You know, have you ever heard of the phrase, a stubborn old man? Have you ever seen a stubborn old man? Have you ever been a stubborn old man? There's something about, and have you heard the phrase, being set in your ways? Have you heard that? Well, you know, we all know as we get older, more and more things, our grasp on things is just going to be, our fingers are going to be pried open, and we're going to have to relinquish it. Sometimes stubbornness is good. It keeps us going, gets us up in the morning. You know, when everything's creaky and, you know, kind of reminding us, I'm not what I used to be. Sometimes stubbornness gets us moving. If stubbornness is focused in the right direction, of course. and all of that is good. But we need to be careful that we do not become a godless or a Christless older person. We need to become more and more gracious in our stubbornness and in our pain and in our depressions and in all of the things that old age brings and we struggle with. We need to be those who don't give in to our heart being diverted to selfishness and self-centered pursuits. So growing older may increase our vulnerability to foolish choices. Hebrews 3 talks about this. Take care that there will not be in any one of you an unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. Encourage one another so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. So part of this context, of course, is understanding Solomon and the Queen of Sheba and what's happening here, this man of great wisdom from whom this book either came or represents by this love poem. And now we have to go back to the Garden of Eden because we are talking about a man and a woman in intimacy. And the first place that took place was in the Garden of Eden. Now, the Song of Solomon has a lot to say about garden. There's a lot of garden imagery in the Song of Solomon. And so we naturally kind of have our minds go back to the original garden, the Garden of Eden, where there was Adam and Eve. And the man said when Eve was created, "At last, this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." Now, I have been looking for Hallmark cards that have this phrase on them, and I have failed to find it as yet. Something, I don't know, does it resonate with the women at all? There's just something about it that I think they missed the mark here, or Adam missed the mark. Of course, it was his first attempt, so what can I say? But he said, but of course what he was saying, and you know when this actually took place, when he said this? When Eve was brought to him? Do you know what happened immediately before that? Yeah, it is always striking to me. God brings each animal that he had created before Adam, and Adam names all of the animals. It's an expression of dominion and authority over the animals as well. But it's also, when it comes to the end of all the animals last, and they bring the aardvark in, as the last animal, and then it says, Scripture says, and there was not found a helper suitable for him. Well, what does that tell us? Somebody was looking for a helper, and they didn't find it in the giraffe or the elephant or any of these other creatures that have been created by God, were brought to Adam. He named them, and there was not found a helper suitable. And then Eve shows up. Taken from the side of Adam, the rib, that surgery. And Adam came out of surgery, and he took one look at Eve, and he knew, this is the one for me. Of course, she's thinking, who else? But this is the one for me. I mean, there is this electrifying, deep down in the soul, things that you and I will have to talk to Adam when we see him about this. What was it like? But this resonance, this sense of completion, and when it talks about a helper, it really is talking not about somebody who can, help him with all the chores that's there, but it really is a word that refers to a necessary addition. In other words, Adam is not complete without Eve. And the image of God is not complete without Eve. There is a necessary addition. It's more of an essential part of Adam's being, is Eve. That's the way God has created it. And so even the Lord said, oh, this is good. This is very good. I like this. And Adam and Eve are created in the garden. Genesis 1, God said, let us make mankind in our image, by our likeness, let them rule. And he blessed them. And he said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over the fish, birds, every living thing on earth. And for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked, but they were not ashamed. Now, it's really important as we go back to the original garden that we understand that the sexual intimacy is not only God's idea, it is an essential reflection of the very person of God. The image of God is incomplete with just one of the genders. And God has designed us so that in our physicality, as we come together, there is a union, there is a completeness, not simply a completeness of us as a person, as Adam is completed by Eve, but it's a completion of our understanding of the image of God. There is something that the man brings to the table of that union, the strength and the masculinity that is a reflection of God. There is something that the woman brings to the table with the artistry and the beauty and the softness and the compassion and the compelling use of her gifts to rule with Adam over the earth, that is a reflection of the very character and person of God. And if we only take one without the other, we do not have a whole view of the Lord. But there's sexuality is dripping in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. They were naked and they were not ashamed. Why were they not ashamed? Because there was nothing to be ashamed about. And then, of course, the Lord gave them a test. And he said, you can eat of the tree, of any of the trees. All of this is yours. I created this. This is yours. I want you to enjoy it. I want you to subdue it. I want you to be fruitful and multiply. But from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat, for on the day that you eat from it, you will certainly die. There is a warning that's here. And I've often thought, by the way, that in my mind, I could be wrong about this, but in my mind, this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the fruit that was there, we don't know that it was an apple, but whatever it was, it may have been the same fruit as another tree over here. All that we are told is, from this tree you may not eat. But maybe there were other trees like it. And if you wanted to know what this apple tastes like, well, you try this one over here, but don't eat of that one. I don't know. But it was a test. And one way to verbalize the test, and this is, you're probably wondering, what does that have to do with the Song of Solomon? We're getting there. But one of the ways to verbalize the test is there is the knowledge of good and evil, Ra and Tav in the Hebrew. And the test is, trust me by obeying me. This one simple prohibition. Demonstrate your trust in me, and I will, in the right time, in the right way, expose you to the meaning of good and evil, Ra and Dav. But what happens is that they eat of the fruit. Did you know that, by the way? They eat of the fruit, and that represents, we're not quite sure. We're going to take matters into our own hands. We're going to solve this on our own. We're going to explore this and experience this according to what we want, rather than what God explicitly says that he wants. It's a test. And so a key takeaway from this is very simply that God tests us to see if we will trust him or our own wisdom. By the way, I want you to keep that dichotomy in mind, that choice, because we're going to bump into that when we get into the prophets. You know, I've been studying Jeremiah Lamentations for a while now in preparation for that. And in Isaiah 30, you know, there's so much drama. I'm going to get carried away here, but there's so much drama here. But basically, God is saying to the Jewish people, don't go down to Egypt. Don't flee in Egypt. Isaiah chapter 30. He's saying, trust me, I will take care of you. If you flee to Egypt, you're going to die there because I'm going to pursue you. And guess what they do? They go down to Egypt. They trust in Egypt. So they had a choice. Isaiah 30, 15, I think, somewhere in there, it says, no, they say, but we will trust in chariots and horses. And so they go down into Egypt and they die. The choice. You and I face it too. The choice. Do we trust God, or do we take matters into our own hands and come up with a solution and walk down that path? Which one is it going to be? There's a lot more that we can say about that. So we have a damaged garden experience that now, because of sin, there is alienation between Adam and Eve. The eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. Notice the sexual overtones of the consequences of sin. They realized that they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. There is a sense of shame. There's a sense of disaster. There's a sense of hiding that comes because of this damaged garden experience. So take that thought, and let's move ahead now a little bit to 100 BC, where we have Abraham and Sarah. And I'm proposing the idea that Abraham was maybe the new Adam. Adam and Eve failed. Now perhaps we have a chance. God is looking for those who will trust his word over their own wisdom, and that will reverse the folly and fear of Adam and Eve. Genesis 12, I will bless you, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Because you have not withheld your son, your only son, I will greatly bless you. And Abraham believed the Lord. He credited him as righteousness. So there seems to be a new beginning here in Genesis chapter 12. But what happens is that they are childless. And so now there's a test. It's like, don't eat from this tree. It's a test of Abraham and Sarah. God made the promise to them. Are they going to trust the promise or take matters into their own hand? And they took matters into their own hands. Sarai said to Abram, see, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Have relations with my slave woman. Perhaps I will obtain children through her. Human solution rather than trusting the Lord. So are Adam and Eve, are they the new I mean, Abraham and Sarah, are they the new Adam and Eve? Well, apparently not. Now we come to Solomon. And remember when Solomon became king, the Lord took him aside and he said, ask whatever you will and I will give it to you. Now, I mean, that's a pretty impressive thing to have a blank check from the Lord himself. And Abraham said, you know, I don't need anything except I need wisdom that comes from you. And so Solomon now becomes maybe a prototype of a new Adam. He's ruling over the kingdoms of Israel. He says, give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil. There we have Ra and Tov. And the queen came and said in Matthew 12, as it recounts us, it says, Jesus says, and something greater than Solomon is here. So there's some drama. There's something about Solomon representing a chance at getting this right of a new creation, a new Adam and Eve. And so when we come to Solomon and the Shulamite, the Song of Songs perhaps is a redeeming love story. It's a repair of what is broken. Rather than the nakedness and shame, there's not a hint of that in the Song of Solomon. It is a celebration of what physical intimacy should be or should have been. It redeems the love story that has gone awry. And so you have Solomon and the Shulamite being united in this Song of Solomon. Now, here's, here we go. Here's some of the language in the Song of Solomon. And you're going to love this. You know this probably pretty well. The Shulamite says, my beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. His abdomen is panels of ivory covered with sapphires. His thighs are like pillars of alabaster set on pedestals of gold. His mouth is full of sweetness and wholly desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend. I love that statement in there. This is the Shulamite describing her lover. He reciprocates, and he says, your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats that have descended from Mount Gilead. Again, I have not seen that on a Hallmark card. Your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn sheep. Your neck is like the Tower of David. How beautiful you are, my darling. How beautiful you are. So it's full of passion and attraction. And if there is a plot, of which we don't know if there is, but there are many attempts to a plot, I think this one is a possible broad brushstroke, what's happening in the Song of Solomon. It begins as a courting song. 3 chapters of poetic declaration of mutual love and affection as they're falling in love and they're attracted to each other and verbalizing what they're seeing and what they're feeling. And then it moves to a wedding ceremony and a banquet at the ceremony. And then finally, a description of passion and intimacy within the loving relationship. So we have evidence of a kind of a fractured relationship here and there in the Song of Solomon, where the Shulamite says, I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my beloved is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my darling. But darling, the Shulamite hesitates to open the door to Solomon, and by the time she does, he is gone, and she searches for him in the city and is mistreated by the watchman. Return, return, O Shulamite, return, return, that we may look upon you. It suggests that the Shulamite has withdrawn emotionally or physically, and the chorus is trying to draw her back, indicating tension or estrangement in the relationship. And then this well-known phrase, catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that are ruining the vineyards while our vineyards are in blossom. The foxes are known to damage the vineyards on the vines, digging around the roots, and it describes those forces within a relationship that can just eat away at the foundation. So there are two major approaches to the Song of Solomon. One is the allegorical approach, which is the figurative approach. This has been the most common, by the way, through the centuries. And the Jewish nation saw that the Song of Solomon is a picture of Yahweh in his love for his bride, the Israelites. And this is a love story between Yahweh and his bride Israel. And then the Christians, of course, see this as a love story between Christ and his church. But there's nothing explicitly in the text that indicates that. And so I land in this realm, the literal understanding of what's happening. It's a romantic lovemaking between a husband and wife. Now, some see that there are three characters in this story. You have the Shulamite, and you have who's in love with a young shepherd. And if you could research this, but the Shulamite is in love with a shepherd, but this kind of lecherous, powerful, wealthy man called Solomon the king comes along, and the Shulamite catches his eye, and he's trying to buy her off and take her from her true love, who is the young shepherd. There are many who think that that's what's happening. That's not what I feel is happening. I believe in the two-character view, that this is a love poem of a literary creation that is either about Solomon or in the genre of Solomon that celebrates the physical intimacy within a relationship. Here's the way I would state it. It's a two-character love poem, a fictional literary creation that celebrates God's design that a husband and wife thoroughly enjoy the physical romance and oneness of intimacy as a reflection of the mysterious harmony and unity of a sacred relationship. So I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly. The purpose is it's an inspired correction to the perversion of sexuality. And it's saying that, hey, this was God's idea, and sexual intimacy within the boundaries that God has is a holy and righteous and beautiful gift to celebrate. And so you have boundaries that God has given. The body is not for sexual immorality, but for the Lord. Flee sexual immorality. Every other sin that a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. And also in 1 Corinthians 6, your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have for God. You are not your own. You have been bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body. Marriage, Hebrews 13, is to be held in honor among all, and the marriage bed is to be undefiled. And even back in Ecclesiastes, Solomon wrote, enjoy life with the wife whom you love. And then there's a book, I don't know if you've ever seen it, probably not, but I would use this quite often in marriage preparation, weddings, called The Mystery of Marriage by Mike Mason. I just love some of the imagery that he has here. And here's a snippet of it. Marriage is the contemplation of the love of God in and through the form of another human being. It is spellbound fascination with the sheer incarnateness of something so purely spiritual. Marriage is living with glory. When we look at our spouse, we see the image of God, the beauty, the attractiveness, the divine nature that's made manifest in physical form, and in that physical union, there is a celebration of the unity and oneness that's there. Now, this is a picture of Mary and I. I'll let you pick out which one is the younger one that's here. But we had on our rings, we have Hebrew on the outside of our rings that Mary designed and had these made. Ane ladodi an lightly, which means I am my beloved's, and my beloved's am I, from Solomon 6:3. And it's an expression of the covenant that we have, that we are united together, that we are one, that this union is a celebratory reflection of the very presence of God and the kindness and the grace of God. So, last takeaway here. We need to celebrate God's gift of sexuality within the boundaries of holiness. Not something to be shied away from. It's a gift, it's a responsibility, it's a deeply spiritual expression in a very tangible physical form, but it is a test, as we see in point 2. Are we going to trust God and live within the boundaries that He has set with this gift? Or are we going to take matters into our own hand to try to grab hold of what we want when it really will turn out to be a nightmare for us? So we're going to take the last 7 minutes or so, and around your tables, if you want to talk and interact over this question from our study. It doesn't have to be only this study, but what is a word of counsel that you would give to an engaged couple?